Well, the timing is very good, and we talk about the reset world, and one of the things that businesses have been focusing on more than ever really in the last year is in tight economic times, the power of partnerships is more important because it's just not feasible for companies to try and do things on their own. So I think the timing is good from that perspective as well. You mentioned a lot of issues, a lot of very big issues. There are a couple that I'd like to focus on. I know, let's start with food security, because I know that this is one that's been an early favorite of the office, something that has gotten a lot of attention not only at state but also through various things the President is doing. Tell us a little bit more about what's going on there. I think it would be of interest to our audience.
Food security is, I guess also called global hunger, but it's bigger than that. It's really trying to devise a whole new method of agricultural, growth and cultivation. And what the President did actually started it off by, I think, with the urging of Secretary Clinton in July at the G8 summit in L'Aquila, Italy. He organized all the I think it was all the G20 actually, and announced a $20 billion emphasis fund for food on behalf of food security. Ours is about $3 billion. But he started that, and then she actually went to the United Nations, and she and the Secretary General put together a group during the UNGA, UN General Assembly, and brought together a group of countries and representatives to discuss it further. She made a major speech at the Clinton Global Initiative on food security, after which I was part of a group with General Mills, USAID, PEPFAR, to announce a commitment of, I think it's going to be about $20 million to, with groups. The idea is to bring in all the food companies to work with small and medium enterprises in sub-Saharan Africa, about 15 countries, and we hope to expand that to teach them, how to grow nutritious crops and, how to cultivate. And the important thing on this is, I think, and it goes to, I think, what Fadi was talking about, you have to bring the countries in. You have to bring the governments of the countries in. Because if you don't, it's not sustainable. You have to bring in the local economy and the local people. And what's also interesting about this is it's not only food security, but it impacts women, which is another, obviously, passion of hers. Women represent the majority of the small farmers, shareholders, and women are the ones that really do most of the work in sub-Saharan Africa and other places around the world. And I think it's also important to be able to bring that kind of economic security to women as well. So it cuts across a lot of areas.
Well, I wanted to ask you about women because it's a topic that is of significant interest and importance to BSR, to our members, and it's been a significant theme just today in the first day of the conference. Are there any particular initiatives that the office is at work on right now that are of particular relevance to women, on women's issues?
Well, as you know, the Secretary, besides my office, Global Partnerships, she established a new office for global women's issues, headed by Milan Verveer, who was her chief of staff, was also the chair of Vital Voices, so we're all kind of interconnected already. And we're working with her on a Global Women's Fund, developing that. Also, HIV/AIDS has, the Global Business Coalition has, and it's about 250, I think many of you are probably part of it, has focused largely on HIV/AIDS and now is expanding their reach to include maternal mortality. So we're convening a group on that issue as well. So it's, we're working on a number of things, gender-based violence. As you I'm sure know, the Secretary, when she was in Africa, went to Goma and the Congo and she said it was one of the worst, probably the worst sight she's ever seen, and has been definitely affected by that, and is going to be working on that issue very personally, very strenuously. So that's something else that we're working on. Of course, the White House has an office that Valerie Jarrett is heading. So we're all working together to really, expand women's rights in every sphere.
So let me ask a Washington-related question, because there's a lot of debate and a lot of conflict in Washington these days. Is it safe to say that the work that you're doing enjoys wider support than some other things that are being debated so fiercely on the Hill these days?
Like healthcare.
That was
climate
one.
Change?
That's two. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. You probably know the Senate has the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Chairman John Kerry appointed Barbara Boxer to head up a new subcommittee on women's issues. So that's another really important focus for her. I know there's a committee on the House out, I can't remember who's chairing it, but Milan just spoke, testified with Nicole Kidman on gender-based violence. So when I was in Kenya just last week, we toured the hospitals, and that's also obviously a very big part of what the HIV/AIDS problem is, because girls are being raped at very young ages, and it's something it's a very big part of dealing with the AIDS epidemic as well.
I know that the State Department is doing some interesting things in opening its doors in other ways. What sort of outreach are you doing to bring in maybe some unusual suspects, in a sense, to bring different ideas into the State Department, possibly in a way that enrich some of the partnerships that we're talking about?
Unusual suspects. I don't know.
Well, not suspects, but.
We are, going out to everyone, to all. One interesting piece of, the whole equation is working on it with diasporas. One thing that we've just decided to do is have a conference on diasporas that, as I mentioned, the remittances, 26% of that, the 80% of the private sector funding assistance, development assistance, comes from remittances, those monies that are sent through Western Union or whatever to their home countries. So we are looking, the Secretary is very impassioned by this, and there's so much potential. When I was in Kenya, I asked the ambassador, how can our office be helpful? How can we, add value to what you're doing? And he said, I'd love to get the Kenyan diaspora involved. There are 350,000 Kenyans, more than any other African nation, and they're in the United States, and they're very successful. And the question is, how do they relate back to, especially youth? Half of the country is under age 21, and it's, as you know, a very corrupt society, endemic. The question would be, how do you bring people of their own to say, okay, we came to the United States and we prospered and we built these businesses, because we are in a society where the rule of law is respected, democracy is respected, freedom of speech, and how can you translate that to the youth to try to make them understand that this process, it doesn't help them in the long run, certainly doesn't help the country. So we're going to be engaged with NDI, National Democratic Institute for International Affairs, which I also served on the board of, doing a lot of political development, youth training. So we're going to engage the diaspora with that in particular. But there's a very strong Indian diaspora, a strong Haitian diaspora. We've set up a Pakistani 501c3 for their diaspora to help with Pakistan. So there's, I think that's something that no one's ever really dealt with. The World Bank a little bit, but I think it's something that we can really use our, we say, convening power to bring everyone together to talk about how each one in their own groups can support their home countries.